Thank you, Glenn. I don't know about you all, but I don't think I've eaten this well in generations. So I know we gave them a hand before we ate, but I'd like to give the Breadbasket crew another hand for the meal. My name is Mitch Kaufman, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to introduce our speaker this evening. Our speaker, Peter Buller, is a 2025 graduate of Bethel College with a degree in Bible and religion and minors in music and in peace, justice, and conflict studies. He was a 2025 Thresher Award recipient for a senior seminar and also for sustained musical performances on oboe and piano. He's also the author of the Mennonite history piece entitled Another 50 Years On, 1974 to 2024, a historical update to the stories of the Kansas Swiss Bohemian churches. Peter's taking a gap year in his studies before beginning classes with Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary next fall. In the meantime, he's living in Independence, Missouri, planning a wedding with his fiancée, Emily Guldner, and looking forward to a youth faith formation internship at Rainbow Mennonite Church in Kansas City, which, as a member there, I would like to say we're very much looking forward to having him. In addition to his reflections on Anabaptism at 500 and his time at Reba Place Church and Living Water Community Church in Chicago this past summer, Peter and his friend and Bethel classmate Jacob Schrog will share some of their musical talents with us and accompany us on a few hymns. Please give a warm welcome to Peter Buller and Jacob.
Thank you all so much for inviting me to come share without a lot of parameters when I was asked. It was kind of an open invitation with some interest in hearing about my summer in Chicago through the Ministry Inquiry Program. And so I'm glad that I'm here and accepted this invitation to speak tonight. As I put in my author's note for the short book that I wrote for the 150th Swiss Bohemian Migration Celebration, I do not take it lightly that you have asked a Mennonite of Dutch and Prussian descent to speak to you all tonight. You overlooked that I would have spoken Low German Plattdeutsch 150 years ago and not the Schweitzer German dialect. And I thank you for your compassion in this matter. We can't all be perfect, after all, so I appreciate that, the mercy that you're showing me today. And most importantly, for all of you Mound Ridge area folks, you overlooked that I was raised on the other side of the Turkey Creek in Inman with all those Philistines over there, so thank you. One funny thing about that old rivalry across the Turkey Creek is that in the modern era, so few people know the Mennonite history of it all, and they don't really care about it, partially because the towns are not as Mennonite as they once were, or kids don't care about history, I don't know. But that rivalry still plays out on the sports court and field. Actually, I have one of my old competitors here in the audience today, Corbin Unruh, who's Mound Ridger over there. But some of the last vestiges of the Mennonite history rivalry carried into my generation, at least in Inman. My story with that comes from my freshman year of high school, my last year playing basketball. I was a JV bench warmer, but a great C-team starter. I want everyone to know that. I still hold an unofficial record for the most points scored in half of a C-team game. So, it was pretty impressive. Mound Ridge was about to play us at Inman, and our assistant coach was hyping us JV boys up to go out and win against Mound Ridge. That's the big game. And he was an old school Mennonite, still is an old school Mennonite, born and raised in Inman. And at the very end of his speech, he tells us, "Let's go out and beat the Schweitzers." None of us knew what a Schweitzer was. And that was the first time I had heard the term. So at least in that moment, there was some of that old school Mennonite rivalry coming through, even if we didn't know it at the time. But we were excited to go out and beat Moundridge. I don't think we did, though. But I'm thankful to be here, continuing my involvement with Schmecca that I started back for the 150th event with Jenny Schrag's play A Goodly Heritage, which I was in also with Corbin, and writing a short history book for the Kansas Swiss Wilhelmian churches, and being on a panel at the celebration called Looking to the Future with a few other young Mennonites. This might be a bad assumption on my part about this audience, but I suspect that those of you who are here tonight enjoy communicating Anabaptist history to other people. You care about this subject. And so I hope tonight to offer you some energy as you go back to your congregations and your homes to be better communicators of Anabaptist history in our churches. I aim to do this through the lens of my summer in Chicago, through Mennonite Church USA's Ministry Inquiry Program, where I interned with two Mennonite churches there, Reba Place Church and Living Water Community Church. And I hope to offer a proposal to you tonight on how to continue the good things we gain as a church with historic history celebrations. And then at the end of all of that, some songs with Jacob Schrag and I. So this summer I had the great opportunity to participate in the Ministry Inquiry Program, which is designed by Mennonite Church USA to work through local Mennonite colleges to offer a chance for those who are interested in ministry and church leadership a chance to explore that calling and gain experience and hone those skills. As someone who's been cultivating and following a call towards ministry for several years, this was a program I knew that would offer valuable learning experience. I chose to look at Mennonite churches in more urban settings because of my experiences growing up as a son of a pastor in rural Kansas here. And I was fortunate to find a fit for me in Chicago that would split my time between two churches, Reba Place Church and Living Water Community Church. During the week, I would split my time between the churches each day and commute the 2 miles between the two meeting houses. And I worshiped with each church for about 1 month, either in June or August, and the entirety of my internship was about 11 weeks. Reba Place Church has its origins in the intentional living community of Reba Place Fellowship, which began in 1957. Reba Place Fellowship is still a continuing intentional Christian community in Evanston, Illinois, which is the city just north of Chicago, where Reba Place Church is. Reba Place Church's website describes their vision, their driving vision of the fellowship as a call to live out a life of radical Christian discipleship as they observed it in the Gospels and in the book of Acts. Open and loving relationships, full sharing of material resources, a visible common life, active witness for justice and peace, and a priority on living out the word of the Lord rather than just talking about it. They believed the words of the earthly Jesus were meant to guide the community of his disciples in every area of life, not only then, but now. Then, after about 24 years, in 1981, they felt a sense of calling that there was a need for not just this fellowship of people living intentionally together, but also a church that was separate from the fellowship's intentional community requirements. And probably the biggest hurdle that most people face in wanting to join the community is that it's a common purse community. So all money and resources are shared in common in this community. So now today, both the church and the fellowship exist alongside each other in community. With most of the fellowship members, there's about 40 in the fellowship. At its height in the 90s, there was, I think, about 150 members of the fellowship. They exist alongside each other, and most members of the fellowship are part of Reba Place Church. I worked closely with the co-pastors of Reba Place Church, Laura Craybill, who was the director of theater at Heston College from 2010 to 2015, and Charlotte Lehman, who has been a Reba Church member since the late 80s and then became a pastor in 2009. In 1995, a young adult group from Reba Place Church felt the calling to plant a church in Rogers Park, which is the northernmost neighborhood of Chicago, so right south of Evanston, where the fellowship and the church and Reba Place Church are. They sought to create a multicultural church of discipleship in the Anabaptist tradition. Within this group of young people was also a significant community of Cambodian immigrants who were members of Reba Place Church. This young group began worshiping in the space of another church in Rogers Park until about 2001, and they describe on their website the Living Water Community Church is what they would eventually be called, and they say on their website that a fatal shooting, drive-by shooting in 2001 of one youth by another at the junction of Pratt Boulevard and Ashland Avenue focused the church's prayer for that corner and drew attention to the mini mall at that location. Members raised the money to purchase the building and then contributed sweat equity to rehab the 6,500 square foot storefront section, which became their permanent meeting house in 2005. Their kind of slogan or mission statement is called to the corner to participate in Christ's work of reconciliation in our church, neighborhood, and the world. Rogers Park itself, the neighborhood that they reside in, is one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the United States because of the consistent resettlement of refugees and immigrants in that neighborhood. Because of the work with these groups of immigrants by members of the congregation, several distinct cultural and language groups continued to form at Living Water alongside the Western English speakers and the Cambodian Khmer speaking group. Today, Living Water Community Church is a fully multicultural and multi-language church, with English, Nepali, Swahili, and Khmer being the primary languages heard on any given Sunday morning. Living Water has large worshiping groups of immigrants from East Africa, Nepal, and an aging Cambodian population. They have 4 pastors, an English-speaking pastor, a Swahili-speaking pastor, a Nepali-speaking pastor, and an English-speaking youth pastor for all of the youth. I worked closely with that youth pastor, Stephen Lamb, and the English-speaking pastor, Kristen Lokes Jackson. But weekly, I was in meetings with the Cambodian and Nepali and East African pastor, Pastor Alexis Ruzahaza, the East African pastor, and Alexis Sunawar, the Nepali pastor. Reba Fellowship, this intentional living community that forms the basis of both, or the kind of the tree of these two churches, has members that attend Living Water Community Church as well. So the fellowship is the bridge between these two churches, and that made it a very easy assignment for me to go between these two churches. They're formed from the same cloth in many ways. There are many great stories of my summer in Chicago that I could tell, many of which include public transportation or biking. I only drove a car once while I was in Chicago this last summer. That was really exciting to not have to drive. And because of their shared DNA, splitting my time was quite easy between the two churches. I got to learn from and be a part of these wonderful communities that have a large percentage of their members who live within walking or biking distance of their meeting house. And they call their building that they hold services in their meeting house rather than a church, because the church is not a building but a people. The intentional community of Reba Fellowship, I got to learn from and fellowship with Reba Fellowship, and be a part of a self-sustaining young adult group with about 10 to 20 other young adults who meet every other week for scripture reading, prayer, and sharing of their daily lives. and they also have other habits outside of that dedicated space: fires on the beaches, all-day birthday parties, going to movies, tacos after church every week. Having a group of peers made community much easier to access. And this was the first time in my experience that I had been a part of a self-sustaining young adult group. The churches that I grew up didn't quite have that. I got to observe what it takes to be an elder in an elder meeting with at least 3 different native languages present and many different cultures all sitting at the same table, working to make decisions for a shared group. I developed patterns of spiritual discipline and Sabbath rest with my pastoral supervisors. And I got to sit in the room where leadership worried and prepared for ICE raids in their neighborhood, which have been happening over the last week in Rogers Park. And they have been responding, thankfully, because of their training that they've been doing this whole year. I was also a part of meetings where they brainstormed ideas to care for the vulnerable members of their community who were facing few job prospects and now slashed health insurance coverage and benefits from the government. I went to a protest in downtown Chicago in June with church members who chanted against authoritarianism and held signs declaring God's mercy and love towards all people. There were 40,000 people marching at that protest. I worshiped in multiple languages. Every single Sunday felt like going to Mennonite World Conference, which I was lucky to do when they had it in Indonesia in 2022. I experienced dance as a part of worship for the first time in a Mennonite church. That's part of the Pentecostal spiritual life that Reba Fellowship was renewed with in the 70s, I think, and that's one of the last vestiges of that kind of Pentecostal spirit that they had a lot in the 20th century. I played my oboe, and I sang with full worship bands that sang hymns from Voices Together, black gospel music, blues, folk, Christian contemporary music, and even originals by members of their community. Sometimes these different genres were all in the same worship service. I regularly biked or took the train 10 miles to see the free symphony concerts in Millennium Park. I also got a flat tire on one of those trips, and I also had my bike that I was borrowing from a church member stolen. So I got the full Chicago experience, they told me. And I stayed with 2 different host families and ate lots of meals in the homes of many different people. It was a full, rich experience that I would encourage you to encourage the college-age kids in your life to explore, even if they're not at a Mennonite college. They might not have heard of this program if they're not at a Mennonite college, but I believe that there's ways that they can make that happen, even if they're not at a Mennonite college. My major projects for the summer were focused on worship. Unique worship planning is an interest I developed at Bethel College while working as a chapel leader and planner, which this last semester I was one of 3 students who organized, planned, and ran all chapel events in lieu of the campus pastor they're not being a campus pastor this last semester, but they're hiring one now, so that's good. At Living Water, I preached a sermon/history lesson on Menno Simons and early Anabaptism as a part of the series the English-speaking group was going through called Holy Disruptors, which was a historical survey of important Christians who disrupted the status quo of Christian thought and life at their time. So I chose Menno Simons, the Anabaptist representative, in this survey of holy disruptors. Most members of Living Water Community Church weren't born in the Mennonite Church. It's a small fraction of the church that were born in the Mennonite Church. So I was encouraged by many members of the church to turn this sermon on Menno Simons into a primer and summary of early Anabaptist history, after hearing from them that they didn't know a lot about Mennonite history, but they were excited about it because they've been living out the beliefs and tenets of the faith, but don't know a lot of the history. Although there were no hymnals in the sanctuary of this congregation, they often sing hymns from Voices Together, just usually projected up on the screen. So we sang at this service, Voices Together 797, We Are People of God's Peace, which we'll sing a little bit later. And for the children's time, several young adult performers performed a reader's theater of the story of Dirk Willems. At Reba Place Church, I helped to plan 2 Sundays to commemorate the Anabaptism at 500 event that we're celebrating this year, this milestone. The first Sunday focused on stories of the 16th century. We sang hymns with text from early Anabaptist leaders, and we put on a drama of stories from early Anabaptists. We compiled a script with scenes adapted from Jenny Schrag's wonderful play, A Goodly Heritage, which starts out in 1525 with the first adult baptisms in Zurich, Switzerland, and has some other early Anabaptist scenes that we adapted. And we also used that reader's theater about Dirk Willems as our final story. And since I had already done lots of research on Menno Simons, we decided to have the framing device for this drama be Menno Simons on the run, talking to a congregation about these stories. So he was the narrator and exposition person to give more context to the Anabaptist movement. And my cooperating pastor insisted that I should be Menno Simons, and so I had to go out and buy a long white beard and a good 1500s looking hat. So that was fun. I put on robes and everything. And for the second Sunday of this 2-part commemoration, we wanted to highlight the diversity of the Anabaptist movement since its formation. We first thought about highlighting different areas of the International Mennonite Church, which in the Global South are continuing to grow, while in the Global North we're continuing to get smaller. But we ended up deciding to discuss how American Mennonites have interacted with and more recently been challenged by Native American indigenous spirituality and history. The music selected included a few Native American hymns from Voices Together, which there are many in that collection, and other songs that were centered on creation. We read scripture from the First Nations translation of the New Testament, and we had a member of the church with Native American ancestry give the opening and centering reflection. The centerpiece of the service was a 2-person panel that I helped moderate. Both these people, David Jansen and Mary Gearing, have been part of an informal group at Reba Place Church that has been learning Native American history, discussing how to respond to the past and current injustices Native people face, and how to reconcile these broken relationships between indigenous people and settlers. Mary Gearing, a recently retired lawyer, she talked about her experiences with being on the ground at the Apache Stronghold in Arizona. The Apache Stronghold is a part of a larger sacred space of the Apache called Oak Flat. And Oak Flat has been sacred native land since time immemorial, but has recently been turned over to extractive industries for copper mining by the federal government. But thankfully, this land transfer is currently being blocked by several legal battles in lower courts. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court recently declined to take up the case and hear arguments about why their religious freedoms should be protected. Mary Gearing, she has been walking with many Apaches and allies during this time, and she shared about that. And the other panelist was David Jansen, who's a Kansas native. He was one of the founding members of New Creation Fellowship in Newton, which was at the time another intentional living community. And he is a landowner here in Kansas. And he has been asking questions about how to repair the fractured relationships between Native American communities and those who own, make their money off of, and live on land that was violently stolen through broken treaties, promises, and military force. Their conversation was a hopeful beginning to further conversations that would hopefully include joining the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery, which is an Anabaptist coalition of churches and organizations seeking to provide reconciliation in this world. These were major projects I organized alongside many daily and weekly tasks. And these projects were centered around sharing Anabaptist history, and at Reba Place, it was in coordination with a historic milestone for the Anabaptist movement. Reflecting on my involvement this year with several other Anabaptism at 500 celebrations and more recent Mennonite anniversary celebrations, I wonder, where do we go from this point of influx of historical information and recounting of stories? We're in a golden age of Mennonite and Anabaptist celebrations here in North America. And for me, that's been very exciting as a student of Anabaptist history. We released a new hymnal in 2020, which provides new life to our worship. Various Russian Mennonite strands have celebrated integration anniversaries. Mennonite Central Committee celebrated its 100th anniversary in 2020. Mennonite World Conference this year celebrated their 100th anniversary. And we're celebrating, of course, the big one this year, the 500th anniversary of the movement that started it all. With these celebrations comes a flurry of new resources: the Anabaptist Community Bible, resource packets for incorporating history into worship, people collecting and repackaging stories of faith ancestors, which there's a collection book back there of stories from the Swiss Wilhelmian churches, one that I wrote, and then there's another one there. But after the excitement wears down, in a few years, the next generation will come up without having had some of these formative experiences of learning the history in an exciting time. They're going to have to wait another 50 years for the big anniversaries. They have not had those formative experiences of being washed in history as many of us have in the last several years. And importantly, many people caught in the instability of young adulthood may not have even participated in these events, whether they didn't see a use in them but might later, or haven't been that involved in church but might later. And as they re-engage with the church in deeper ways in the future, they might not have this foundation of history and theology that many of us have gotten over the last several years. So my hope is that the Mennonite history communicators in this room and elsewhere can advocate in their churches for the telling and retelling of our faith ancestors' stories as part of the yearly church liturgical calendar. This is my proposal here. Yearly, we should strive to have, and this is just my proposal, you can adapt this however you want, but we should have a 3-service cycle that washes us again and again in the services, in the stories and theology of the past and present of Anabaptism. Not just a Sunday school series that the most dedicated of churchgoers will go to, but a series of worship services that ground us in Jesus as the center of our faith and the stories of our faith ancestors as the cloud of witnesses surrounding us, as Hebrews 12:1 and 2 says. So here's my proposal for this 3-service cycle. The first, a service that tells early Anabaptist stories, invites people into the story of the Anabaptist faith in visceral, attention-grabbing ways like drama or reader's theater or embodied storytelling. And it should hopefully focus on what the core behaviors and tenets of Anabaptist faith is. It's not just a telling of history, but it's a communicating of the theology that impacts our communities. Second, the second service would be one that explores stories of peacemaking in the 20th and 21st centuries. Draft resistors, alternative service stories, war tax resistors, those who went and served in places in need of peace. Stories of the global Anabaptist church, like Mesocrates Christos Church in Ethiopia, which is now the largest Mennonite church in the world. and their story of survival during persecution is an incredible story that I find much hope in. Or Muslim Christian peacemakers in Indonesia. That is a story that I got to hear in person in Indonesia. Sharing of prophetic, or along with stories of the global church and those here at home, this can also be an opportunity for sharing of prophetic traditions in the U.S. that Anabaptists can also learn from. Think the indigenous Christians that are challenging us today, or the Black American prophetic tradition that has challenged the world to be more just. Sing new songs that challenge and inspire on this Sunday, that give a new perspective and invite congregations forward into the newness of God's love. And the third service that I'm proposing would be one that tells the stories of the local church context. Ideally, these are stories from people within your own congregation about their experiences with following Jesus and living out the Anabaptist vision of Jesus' good news. It could also focus a little more on some notable stories from your congregation or your area that might not be known to younger kids. Here in Burton, the first story that I would share would be of John J. Schrag, the war bond resistor who was nearly lynched during World War I for his commitment to giving allegiance only to Jesus and his kingdom and not the kingdoms of this world. And as a bonus, we've gone over 3 services here. I'll give you a bonus even, that in the high school and junior high youth curriculum, every couple of years, there should be a forum for honest and frank discussion about nonviolence, pacifism, and non-resistance, and conscientious objection. If the young people of our churches do not have these conversations in the church, they will be ill-equipped to have them out in the world. And I can safely say that most young Mennonites are not equipped right now, as they go off to college or on their own, to talk about being a conscientious objector, a pacifist, someone who follows the tenets of Anabaptism like non-resistance and non-violence. We don't feel the pressure of a draft right now to make these conversations happen. And one of the notable things that I found in my history book that I was compiling with congregational stories from the last 50 years was that a big topic in every generation, as far back as I could tell in these churches, was conscientious objection and resisting the violent efforts of war in our world. But in the last 50 years, since the draft ended, that's not a major concern of every church now, because there's no pressure to have those conversations. So as a church, we have let a couple of generations grow up without these conversations, and I think we're worse off for it. But that doesn't have to continue. So hopefully this proposal that I've given on 3 services to integrate not just the stories of our history and our culture, but also the theology that grounds and roots these cultures and has created them, hopefully you are energized by this proposal, something that you can take back to your own churches and maybe take to your conferences and ask for resources to help envision this. This proposal will require committed history communicators like yourselves to do lots of work and be persistent in ensuring that we continually immerse ourselves in the theology of our tradition, because it is the theology that shapes the culture. So that is my proposal. I would now like to invite Jacob Schrag up to join me in leading some songs from my summer up in Chicago. And these are not just songs from my summer, but also songs that I hope that can accentuate how our theology and history can be shared and reflected through song. And I'll give a short reflection for each song. I'll do that. The first one is Jacob setting up here. So the first song, which does not have lyrics in your little packet, is Down by the Riverside, Ain't Gonna Study War No More. As the prophet to the Anabaptist Church, Drew G.I. Hart, argues in his book, released I think in 2017, Who Will Be a Witness, the Anabaptist movement must learn not just from its own history, but from the lessons, story, and theology of the Black prophetic tradition in America. If we want to truly be a counter-witness to the dominant American consciousness, which these voices have been doing since they were brought as enslaved people to these lands, we must engage with their voices and their consciousness. And as David Gushee, who's a renowned ethicist who visited Bethel College in 2024 to talk about Christian nationalism, discussed, the Anabaptists and the Black prophetic tradition in America both have histories of resisting Christian nationalism as well. Anabaptists have been doing this for 500 years. But here in the Americas, the Black prophetic tradition has been resisting and criticizing the powers for far longer than the Anabaptist tradition has. So in this light, in this calling by Hart and Gushee, it was a joy for me to be at Reba Place Church this summer and be led each week by an African-American spiritual or gospel tune by a woman named Ann Stewart. She's an elder of this Reba Place community, and she was one of the voices who encouraged the community in the early 90s to begin fully integrating African-American spirituals into worship. So from the pulpit each week, she stands up to give information on the offering, but then also offers a spiritual or gospel song without any music, just by voice. So we're going to do that now. Oh, and I forgot to mention that this song is special to me because it merges these two traditions, the Black American prophetic tradition, which it comes from as an African-American spiritual, but also the peace tradition that we hold as Anabaptists. This is a song about not going to war anymore. I'm going to lay down my burdens. Is the first line. I'm gonna lay down my burdens down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay down my burdens down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Study war no more. I'm gonna put on my starry crown. I'm gonna put on my starry crown. Down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna put on my starry crown. Down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Study war no more. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield. Down by the riverside. Down by the riverside. Down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield. Down by the riverside. Down by the riverside. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Prince of Peace.
Walk with the Prince of Peace down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Gonna walk with the Prince of Peace down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I ain't gonna study war no more, ain't gonna study war no more, study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more, ain't gonna study war no more, study war no more.
I lost my microphone. Our next song is from Voices Together, and so it'll be in your little pamphlet there. Who now would follow Christ? The gruesome nature of this hymn text, which in verse 2 describes the instruments of torture and execution of Christ's servants, was jarring to me when I first sang it this past year at Heston College's Anabaptism at 500 hymn sing. I almost couldn't believe it, that this hymn was in the hymnal, something so gruesome and descriptive. And that's in the second verse there. Even the third verse, all is lost, even husband, child, and wife. The hymn text is from the Ausbund, which is the first Anabaptist hymnal created. It was created in the early 1600s, I believe. And it is still used by the Amish to this day, making it the oldest continually used hymnal in the world. The nucleus of the book contains 51 hymns written by a number of Anabaptists in the dungeons of the castle of Passau on the Danube, where they lay imprisoned between, I'm correcting myself here, between 1535 and 1540, so right at the beginning of the Anabaptist movement, these initial songs were crafted. Many of these prisoners were later martyred. When paired with the actual stories of early Anabaptists, I believe this to be a powerful hymn. It testifies that the beliefs of the early Anabaptists were so radical that their hymns name the ways that they were killed and tortured because of those beliefs. The question for us with this hymn that I find is, will we resist the powers of the world and cling to the tenets of non-coercion and non-violence in a way that puts us at odds with the default answers of the dominant consciousness around us, like these people who penned this hymn did? That, to me, will determine if we live up to the nature of this hymn.
Now
it was a joy to lead this next song at Reba Place Church this summer. And that is Creation is a Song, which is also in your packet. There are many incredible indigenous hymns in Voices Together, and they can be meaningful when learned and repeated in worship, and when paired with listening to the prophetic voices of indigenous leaders. Sarah Augustine is a modern-day prophet to the Mennonite Church with her work in co-founding the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery, and in writing her 2 books, one of which was a Bethel College basic issues of faith and life textbook for my graduating class. And she visited Bethel College last year to speak about it. The Voices Together resources for indigenous hymns can be found online that give greater context and how to perform them respectfully and truthfully. They are a great resource to help provide context to the hymn that you are singing. And so I'll quote a little bit from the context for Creation as a Song. The lyrics for this song were inspired by the writings and teachings of Peace Chief and Mennonite pastor Lawrence Hart. Hart has long been, or had long been, a long inspiration for Mennonite peacekeepers and earthkeepers during his life. The concept for the phrase, creation is a song that we can see, is from his interpretation of Psalm 19, which is included in his chapter in The Earth is a Song Made Visible, which was a book on creation and the environment compiled by the Mennonite Environmental Task Force in 2000. As founder and director of the Cheyenne Cultural Center in Clinton, Oklahoma, Hart calls us to nurture an intimate spiritual and personal relationship to the earth, and implores us to join the Native American perspectives that maintain that there is a sacredness about the earth, and when any part of it is mistreated, all forms of life within the circle, including humankind, are mistreated. Thus, the song's lyrics celebrate the sacredness of creation and urge us to join the harmony. And the text and the music were composed by local Newton folk Mennonites, Jude and Doug Crable.
Yeah, so Peter's going to go ahead and start us off with the oboe while I provide the rhythm, and then he'll keep playing oboe throughout the hymn. I'll move on throughout and be singing the words with you guys, so just follow along with me.
Yep.
Creation is a song that we can sing, a sacred gift from God. Let's join the harmony, the rolling of the oceans, the bubbling of the spring, the night sky filled with jewels, a flock of fleeting wings. Creation is a song that we can sing, a sacred gift from God. Let's join the harmony, dancing prairie meadow from swaying on the vine, boiling storm clouds rising, lightning across the sky. Creation is a song that we can sing, a sacred gift from God. Let's join the harmony, majestic sleeping mountain, forest green and deep, every living creature in our care to keep. Creation is a
And for our final song tonight, one of my personal favorite hymns, "We Are People of God's Peace," and that's on the big sheet of paper. "We Are People of God's Peace" is an act of testifying to the counter community of peace that Jesus calls us to as his followers. The hymn text is inspired by Menno Simons on verses 1, 3, and 4, and Mennonite World Conference's worship committee penned the second verse, which the second verse actually happens to be my favorite, so I have to apologize to Menno Simons for that one. But the second verse is special to me for the line, "Though we falter and we fail, Christ will still renew us." This is an especially powerful line when sung in protest to people of power as they engage in bolstering violent systems. It offers them a lifeline that we all mess up, but Christ's mercy is present, and it is never too late to turn around from the place which we have found ourselves in. This hymn has become a staple of the Mennonite Action Protest Songbook, and was used this last spring, even by Bethel College students, to voice protest to the current policies of policing on Bethel College campus. When we sing Menno Simons, I think it's good practice to back Menno Simons up with some more Menno Simons. So this is from his writing called A Fundamental Doctrine, written in 1556, where he talks about the qualities of the regenerated, or those who have been fully transformed by Jesus' call to discipleship. Nothing is the same as it was before Jesus. Quote, "These regenerated have a spiritual king over them, who rules them by the unbroken scepter of his mouth, namely with his Holy Spirit and word. They are children of peace, who have beaten their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, and know of no war, and give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Their sword is the sword of the Spirit, which they hold in a good conscience through the Holy Ghost." And we will do this one a cappella. So hopefully you are warmed up and ready to do all 4 parts.
We are people of God's peace as a new creation. Love unites and strengthens us at this celebration. Sons and daughters of the Lord, serving one another, a new covenant of peace binds us all together. We are heralds of God's peace for the new creation. And by grace the word of peace reaches every nation. Though we falter and we fail, Christ will still renew us. By the Holy Spirit's power, God is working through us. We are children of God's peace in this new creation, spreading joy and happiness through God's great salvation. Oh, we bring in spirit meek in our daily living, peace with everyone we seek, good for evil giving. We are servants of God's peace, of the new creation. Choosing peace we faithfully serve with heart's devotion. peace.